Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the George W. Norris Legislative Chamber for the 70th day of the 108th Legislature First Session. Our chaplain today is Senator Mosier. Please rise.
I begin with paraphrases of two parts of the Bible, one from Isaiah. My ways are not your ways are not my ways. The Lord says his ways are so much higher than our ways. And then from Matthew, Jesus says, wherever two or three are gathered in my name, I am with you. Thank you, Lord, for the many blessings that you've bequeathed on our state and our country, more than we deserve. Give us wisdom and forgive those who transgress against us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
I recognize Senator Dorn for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I call to order the 70th day of the 108th Legislature, first session. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call. Mr. Clerk, please record.
There's a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you. Are there any corrections for the journal?
There are no corrections this morning.
Are there any messages, reports, or announcements?
There are, Mr. President. Communication from the Governor, dear Clerk Metzler and Gross, Legislative Bill 103E was received in my office April 25th, 2023. This bill was signed and delivered to the Secretary of State on May 1st, 2023. Signed sincerely, Jim Pillen, Governor. Your Committee on Enrollment Review reports Legislative Bill 92, 191, 227, 254 as correctly engrossed and placed on final reading. Additionally, notification from the Urban Affairs Committee that they will have an exec session under the north balcony at 11 o'clock today. Exec session, Urban Affairs, 11 o'clock under the north balcony. That's all I have this time, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. While the legislature is in session and capable of transacting business, I propose to sign and do hereby sign legislative resolutions 107, 108, and 109. Senator Hughes would like to recognize the physician of the day, Dr. Pat Hotovy from York. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, first item on the agenda, Legislative Bill 705. Priority motion, Senator Conrad would move to indefinitely postpone the bill pursuant to Rule 6, Section 3F.
Senator Merman, you're recognized to open.
Good morning, Lieutenant Governor, and good morning, Nebraska. I rise today to open on LB 705 and the accompanying Education Committee Amendment, AM 1468. Before diving into this bill any sooner, I want to thank every member of the Education Committee. We had a great bill load for a two-day, we had a heavy bill load for a two-day committee, and this was a long process. To preface, we had to go do quite a bit of deliberation in the creation of this package. With the time crunch associated with the first session of the 108th Legislature, we had to find broad consensus to get this bill together. Each of the senators on the Education Committee, Senator Albright, Senator Breezy, Senator Conrad, Senator Linehan, Senator Sanders, Senator Walls, and Senator Wayne, you all have my deep thanks and heartfelt gratitude for your work during this session. During this process, I've outlined 4 key issues this committee had to tackle. These are in no particular order of importance, but they were where we found overwhelming consensus. First, teacher recruitment and retention. Second, school safety. Third, special education funding and funding for more school activities. Fourth, increased student and parental involvement. I believe every bill the Education Committee put forward fits under these 4 objectives. I'm going to discuss the bills I sponsored as part of this package, and I invite others who have bills in our committee package to speak more in depth about their bills. I will start with LB 705, which retools Nebraska lottery funding for several different education purposes. To start, 58% of the lottery funding, or about $14.2 million, will be used to fund the Nebraska Opportunity Grant scholarships, which are provided to college applicants attending a Nebraska post-secondary institution while having a minimum estimated family contribution, as determined by completing the FAFSA. 7%, about $1.7 million, goes toward the Community College Gap Assistance Program Fund, which aims to fund education expenses for students enrolled in high-need fields that would not be eligible for Pell Grants. This program specifically targets prospective students seeking a certificate or an education for accredited or non-accredited job training. The fields this would cover would include, but not be limited to, financial services, transportation, warehousing, distribution, logistics, precision metalling, renewable energy, agriculture, food processing, health services, construction, computer and engineering services, and more. We've included 1% of funding, about $245,000, to reauthorize the Door to College Scholarship, a scholarship for YRTC graduates that have graduated from an accredited public or private school within 1 year of being discharged from a YRTC. We've included 2% of the lottery fund for the College Pathway Program Cash Fund. To stay brief, this funding will be used to assist economically disadvantaged students and minority students who are applying for college or trade school. The funding will be utilized by the College Pathway Program, which assists these students in tasks such as applying for FAFSA, applying for scholarships, writing personal statements, creating a resume, and more. This was a late addition to this bill, and I'll have to defer to Senator Wayne to discuss the program in more detail. We've also retooled the Competitive Innovation Grant, to which we've allowed 10% of the available lottery funding. This program will be used to fund Senator Wayne's STEAM bill. I had the pleasure of attending a briefing this winter regarding the STEAM program. Its aim is to attract a newly created educational chemistry-based video game with the goal of engaging students in STEM fields at an early age. I don't want to speak totally out of bounds about the STEAM bill, so I'll defer any more questions on STEAM to Senator Wayne. Moving on, we've included a 1.5% of lottery bill funding for a mental health training grant, which will be awarded to school districts or ESUs. Each applicant will equip educators to safely de-escalate crisis situations, recognize signs and symptoms of potential mental illness, and learn how to timely refer a student to the appropriate mental health services. LB 705 allocates 8%, or about $10 million, to establish the Behavioral Training Cash Fund. My team and I have worked on this issue extensively with members of the Education Committee. LB 705 allows the Nebraska Department of Education to adopt a model policy for K-12 classroom behavioral management. School districts must implement a similar or closely identical behavioral policy. As members of this body have discussed previously, we have a behavior issue in schools, and this body has an obligation to do two things. Number one, inform teachers of their existing rights under the law to defend themselves, their students, and the classroom learning environment from disorder or potentially violent students. And number two, equip educators with the necessary funding to obtain behavioral management training, which can then be applied in the classroom. I want to thank Senator Walz and Conrad for working on this piece with me. We have our differences, and we were able to find a compromise on this section, which contributed to getting this bill out of committee 8-0. The bill includes 3%, about $735,000, for distance education incentives. I've heard from many schools in my district that this funding is essential. The existing workforce shortage has impacted schools large and small. When we first introduced this bill, we didn't have this piece. Upon conversation with superintendents and ESUs in my district, we reattached this. Distance education funding is vital for schools without the adequate resources needed to satisfy their required foreign language class, a part of their curriculum. It is becoming increasingly difficult to recruit Spanish, German, or French teachers to teach in our schools, especially in rural Nebraska. The distance education incentive funding allows schools to provide an online alternative to satisfy their requirements. One important change we've made structurally this year is we're merging the Excellence in Teaching and the Career Readiness and Dual Credit programs. Both of these will be funded at an 8% clip, or about $2 million. The Excellence in Teaching Cash Fund is used to retain teachers in accredited school districts, ESUs, public schools, or private schools in Nebraska, with the added goal of improving the skills of existing teachers. The Career Readiness and Dual Credit program will distribute money to teachers enrolled in courses leading to qualifications to teach dual credit courses and career and technical education courses. These classes give high school students a chance to earn college credit before graduating high school, which provides a student with more flexibility before entering trade school or their undergraduate institution. And finally, the last 1.5% of the lottery fund has been assigned to the Expanded Learning Opportunity Grant. This grant is currently being used for after-school opportunity programming between a school-community partnership. This program provides elementary-age students, secondary-age students, and their families with support activities and services after school. These programs do not duplicate elementary and secondary school day learning.
1 minute.
Thank you. If you have any questions regarding LB 705 or any of the pieces associated with this bill, please do not hesitate to reach out to me or my staff here on the floor, and we will work diligently to get your answers. I'd like again to remind those that have bills in the package to enter the queue to speak on them. Likewise, I will get back into the queue to discuss the other bills I sponsored in the package, but until then, I will yield back the balance of my time to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Merman. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to open on your motion.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. Just to refresh the recollection of the body, these motions that were filed in wake of the rule change that the body adopted earlier this year were meant to help structure debate moving forward. I want to be clear about my intentions with my motions on this bill, and I'll probably end up pulling them, that I do not seek to kill the bill in any way, shape, or form. And let me tell you why. First of all, I want to make sure to extend my sincere gratitude to Senator Merman and as chair of the Education Committee and my fellow Education Committee members. Also a big shout out and well-deserved shout out to the committee staff who works diligently to assist us in our endeavors. And I also want to express gratitude that I know fellow committee members feel as well towards all stakeholders in the education community who step forward to sit with us for countless hours and share their perspective as educators, as administrators, as parents, as higher education representatives. And then every now and again, we're lucky enough to have some students come and share their perspective as young leaders in their community as well. I am a first-time member of the Education Committee this session, and I have really relished the opportunity to dig in more deeply to the education issues facing our beloved state of Nebraska. And I think it goes without saying, but just to put a finer point upon it, Nebraska has great public schools, and we have great teachers, faculty, staff, and engaged parents border to border. Our public schools typically score at the top of those lists. You want to score at the top of, despite the fact that we still have a lot of challenges when it comes to overall school funding and things like teacher pay. I believe that strong public schools are a cornerstone to a sound society and to a vibrant democracy. And our public schools in Nebraska have been and will continue to be a generational point of pride, something that binds us together all across this beautiful, diverse state. So taking into account those kind of big picture considerations, what we started to hear in terms of pattern and practice for the bills that were brought before the Education Committee were really around some top key issues. And I think that the Education Priority Bill helps to address those top key issues in a thoughtful way with its various component parts. So some of the top issues that we saw a consistent thread in terms of a need to address at the Education Committee level was funding for teacher pay, recognizing that the same challenges that we see in workforce development across the state of Nebraska hit our schools really hard. And we need to do all that we can to increase pathways to becoming a teacher for people who are called to public service. We need to do all that we can to be good partners with our local school districts to increase funding for teacher recruitment and retention. And we need to look very carefully at what the data and the research shows us in terms of where we need to make investments and improvements to ensure all students have an opportunity to succeed, which benefits all of us in Nebraska and, of course, our future shared prosperity. So when you look at the component parts of the Education Committee priority bill, you can see that Senator Linehan has brought forward very thoughtful legislation to try and provide increased investments to help teachers stay in the classroom and to bring new teachers into the classroom who have that passion and experience but may need help navigating different pathways to get there. You'll also see, as part of the overall Education Committee package, and of course as part of Senator Sanders' bill that she brought forward addressing a transformational change to educational funding, the need for increased funding for our schools in general and in particular to ensure that students with special needs have the resources that they need to be successful, including significant increases and investments and changes in terms of how we deliver funds for special education services. We also heard a lot about how different students are in need of different kinds of support to ensure that they're not unfairly entangled in punitive discipline programs within public schools. Senator McKinney brought forward important legislation in this regard. Senator Vargas has brought forward important legislation in this regard, and those pieces continue to be an important part of the puzzle as well. I do want to finally acknowledge in my opening on the motion how important it is for us to lift up and appreciate every stakeholder that makes our strong public education system strong, to recognize all of the different and varied and diverse solutions that the committee put together to try and advance teacher shortage, to try and address equity, to try and ensure increased investment. I see each of these component parts as solutions, pieces of a puzzle that are starting to be put together to address the top issues in education in Nebraska with specific, tangible solutions. And I really appreciate the collaborative nature that the committee has conducted its work within. It's no surprise to anyone that our public schools are under fire, and there are a lot of hot button issues that raise a lot of passions and interests in regards to our educational policy. We heard that passion and interest on a host of issues before the Education Committee, and I think that we have struck the right balance to being responsive to the citizenry, being responsive to stakeholders, and ensuring that we have a thoughtful policy response that meets the needs of the second house, educational leaders, and most importantly, our students, our great Nebraska students who are indeed our future. I will have an opportunity to go into more detail later for the pieces of legislation that I have in this committee package, and to talk a little bit more about ensuring due process rights for those in the educational framework and ensuring a strong disability rights lens with the work that we bring forward. So with that, I definitely am looking forward to the debate today. I think that this debate should center things like increased investment, our great public schools, an improved lens and a stronger lens on equity. And I think that this package will help to meet the needs of the movement of the moment and keep an eye towards the future, which is exactly what we should be doing in this legislature and in regards to public education. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Arch, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Section 107 of AM 1468, beginning on page 111, contained the provisions of LB 708, which is a bill I introduced this session. I want to thank Senator Merman, the members of the Education Committee, for including this language in the committee amendment. LB 708 is a result of an interim study conducted last year and proposed by LR 438, which was introduced by the Health and Human Services Committee. The purpose of the study was to identify potential policy changes to improve communication and sharing of case-specific information among state and local agencies responsible for the care, custody, and treatment of systems-involved youth, with the goal of improving efficiency in treating youth who transition from the care of one agency to another. The interim study involved a series of roundtable discussions to identify barriers to communication and information sharing with respect to this group of youth. Our study group included Senator Walz, myself, former Education Commissioner Matt Bloomstead, and representatives of the Department of Education, DHHS CEO Danette Smith and representatives from that agency, and State Court Administrator Corey Steele and representatives from the courts and probation. First, when we talk about system-involved youth, we had to define exactly which youth we were talking about. System-involved turns out to be pretty broad. So we decided to start with looking at the care of court-involved youth. This would include those in foster care and those in our YRTC system. We divided the study into two components, education and clinical. The provisions in AM 1468 reflect the education component of the study. With respect to education, we started with 4 key questions. What information is already being shared? What opportunities do we have to improve the education of these youth? And what barriers exist to improving communication and coordination of this piece of youth's care? This amendment is the next step in answering those questions. The language requires the Department of Education, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Office of Probation Administration, and the State Court Administrator to enter into a memorandum of understanding for the sharing of data relevant to students who are under the jurisdiction of the juvenile court. The memorandum is to include the intent for the State Department of Education to contract with an outside consultant with expertise in the education of court-involved students. Number of things that the consultant is required to do, and those are listed. A collaborative effort to develop policies and procedures for the sharing of data of such students shall include but not be limited to the State Department of Education, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Office of Probation Administration, the State Court Administrator, the Juvenile Court System, the Superintendent of Schools for the Youth Rehabilitation Centers, public school districts, educators, and court-involved students and their parents. On or before December 1st, 2024, the Department of Education shall complete a final report detailing the recommendations of the consultant and any policies and procedures that are being considered for adoption. Who we are talking about here are a very vulnerable population of students. They may be facing a multitude of challenges, problems at home, mental health issues, behavioral health issues, and now they're in the court systems, which oftentimes results in multiple living placements and multiple school placements. Being able to share data will help prevent these students from getting lost in the system. This will be an ongoing effort, and adoption of this amendment will provide an assurance that the involved entities, NDOE, DHHS, the courts, probation, and other stakeholders will continue to work toward improving the educational outcomes of court-involved youth. With that, I want to take a step back and just talk a little bit about what we discovered in that interim study and what we did with our work group, because one thing that we realized is that there is already some information on education being shared, but it is very very dependent upon the individuals involved.
1 minute.
Omaha Public Schools has a person that's actually embedded to help with this communication, but obviously many school districts do not have that person. And so depending upon who you know, how you can get that information, when somebody transfers into your district, the next morning they are in your school district and in school, we just need a central data source that these schools can put information into so that if you have the privilege of permission to go in and find that information, it is readily available to you so that we don't have that downtime. Frustrating to the students, frustrating to teachers. We want to improve the education experience for these court-involved youth. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Arch. Senator Linehan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. I want to join in Senator Merman and Senator Conrad's comments about the committee first before I get to my parts of the bill. I think I just wrote down the members of the committee, and it's interesting, maybe a little sad, that out of the 8 members on the Education Committee, five are in the senior class. So we have a lot of experience on this committee. We've got Senator Albright, Senator Breezy, Senator Linehan, Senator Walls, Senator Wayne. And then if you add Senator Conrad, who's already been here 8 years before she came back, that's a lot of seniority on the committee. And it's been a tough committee because these are tough issues. But I feel very honored to be part of all that's going on in public education this year. The governor set the tone, Governor Pillen set the tone by setting aside $1 billion for the Education Futures Fund, which has finally, I think, got us to a point where public education can trust the legislature when we commit, which we have, another $300 million annually to public education. So from this year to the next $300 million. And what is that $300 million going to do? It's going to, for the first time, provide every student who has special needs, 80% of their funding will come from the state. It's a huge win for everyone, for every school, for every student, for every special ed teacher. It's very important we get this done. It's not in this bill, this isn't Senator Sanders' bill, but I think it sets the tone for all the things that we're also doing in this bill. It also, for the first time, makes sure every child in the state that's in a public school is getting funding from the state. Maybe not enough, that can be argued, but at least it's a step forward. My part of this particular bill, I actually have 2 bills in this bill. First one I'm going to talk about is what started out as LB 385 and was amended by the Committee Amendment 1420. We can have all the money in the world, which we don't, but we can have funding, but if we don't have teachers, we still have a huge problem. And we don't have enough teachers. I can't recall right offhand if we're 900 short or 1,000 short, and that's overall, and we're especially short with special ed. We have more students and more space than we have dual teachers with dual certificates, so we've got juniors and seniors who are capable and willing to take dual credit classes, but we don't have the teachers. And I found out about this, and Senator Walls, and I think it was 3 years ago now, maybe 2 years ago, Senator Walls, while she was chairman, pulled several administrators together, and we met out at Southeast Community College, and they were hair on fire. We have a problem with teacher shortage. So this bill will create the Nebraska Teacher Recruitment and Retention Program. The money for this will come out of the Education Futures Fund. The Department of Education will handle the process, and for every teacher who completes their 2nd, 4th, and 6th year of teaching, regardless of what school district they are in, they don't have to stay in the same school district, but they stay in teaching in Nebraska. Their 2nd year, they will receive $2,500 grant from the state. The 4th year, they will receive $2,500 after they end the 4th year, $2,500 from the state. And in the 6th year, another $2,500. Because when we met with the administrators, what they told us is they lose teachers between the 2nd and 3rd year, 3rd and 4th year. If they can keep them in that 5th and 6th year, finally, when they've moved up the chart, maybe gotten their master's degree, their pay is increased, they can keep them. But they're losing way too many teachers in those first couple of years.
1 minute.
Understandable why. The other, and I will get back up. The other thing that I think is very important in this, it also includes a $5,000 grant for any teacher who goes back, who's teaching now and goes back and gets a STEM, special education, or dual credit credential so they can help fill up those gaps. So I would ask for you to support this bill. It's very important. I think we're doing a lot of things that are very good for public education, this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Senator Von Gilleren, you're recognized to speak.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. President. I rise this morning in support of LB 705, and eventually we're going to have some amendments up here, but in the interest of time, we've punched in to make sure that we get to share a little bit about those. I'll be providing AM 1503, which is the amendment that was LB 805, and there should be a handout on your desk that provides some highlights about that bill. 805 intends to improve character development in the state educational system by providing youth organizations listed in Federal Code 36 Subtitle 2, Part B, Access to Public Schools. I want to thank Colby Coash with the Nebraska School Board Association, and in particular Millard Schools, who worked with me closely to work on any issues with the bill. The amended language addresses those concerns and other concerns that were brought by others in this body. We've worked out what I believe is a well thought out compromise that maintains control in the schools, as well as keeping positive relationships with nonprofit civic youth organizations that have long-standing relationships and a history of improving schools and students and communities. The amended version limits the organizational access to non-curricular time, and that was an important thing, obviously, to the school districts. It's not mandatory for any student, again, which was a point that was brought up. It says that these organizations are provided one such opportunity each year to present their information, so it's a minimal amount of time and hassle for schools to coordinate. All organizations must provide background checks on their representatives, and that's at the cost of the organization. This was, again, part of the amendment, which is not reflected. The fiscal note originally reflected that the state patrol would be performing those background checks at cost of the state, and that is not accurate based on the amendment. Bill simply allows these organizations to present their information to students if those students are interested in becoming members and getting involved. Again, this only addresses those youth organizations in federal codes that are youth-centered. Some have expressed concern over this list, that it opens up schools to all groups, and there are 94 chartered organizations on the list, but again, the bill limits them to only 6 youth-serving organizations. The groups we're talking about are the Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, Little League, FFA, Boys and Girls Clubs, and several others, all who have demonstrated a positive impact here in Nebraska. I'm sure many in this room have been members of one of those organizations or have a child or grandchild currently in one of them, and we're talking, of course, about the future. Groups like FFA provide character-building life skills and experience that will be valuable all throughout life. They make better students, better leaders, and even give them valuable skills for the future. There have been some school districts that have been resistant to allowing these organizations in to benefit our youth, and this provides clarity to those school districts that these organizations can and will positively impact their communities. I want to mention the Attorney General weighed in on some of the concerns and returned a favorable opinion, stating that there are no issues to the state. I did hear this morning, interestingly, on the radio coming in, I heard that student discipline issues are up 70% post-COVID. It's a fact that these organizations teach kids life skills, leadership, character building, and they create better students and a better classroom environment. Also on that same news story, it mentioned that 50% of teachers are considering leaving the industry. I think teachers would be the first to testify that the kids that are involved in these organizations are better students or leaders within their schools, within their communities, and they are glad to have them in their classroom. A couple of the organizations, I printed their mission statements just to share. FFA's mission is to make a positive difference in the lives of students by developing their potential for premier leadership, personal growth, and career success through agricultural education.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Boys and Girls Clubs. Their motto is to empower youth to reach their full potential and exceed beyond their dreams. The Girl Scouts. Girl Scout law says, I will do my best to be honest and fair, friendly and helpful, considerate and caring, courageous and strong, and responsible for what I say and do, and to respect myself and others, respect authority, use resources wisely, make the world a better place, and be a sister to every Girl Scout. I think we can all agree that these are terrific character attributes that we'd love to see in our children, our grandchildren, and students all across Nebraska. So I ask your support for AM 1503 when it comes up on the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Von Gillerin. Senator Erdman, you're recognized to speak.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. President. I was trying to review this bill. There are 17 bills included in this Christmas tree bill. So one tries to get his hand around what exactly all this means. But it appears that the Education Committee brought about 20% of their bills that came before their committee all in one bill. So I was just going through the issues with each one of these bills, looking at the committee statements. I see there were some people who voted no and some people who didn't vote at all. And then there was one that didn't even have a committee statement. So let's start with this. I'd like to ask Senator Walz a question if she would yield.
Senator Walz, will you yield to a question?
Yes.
Senator Walz, I noticed on several of the committee statements you voted no. And the one that I'm going to speak about first is LB 414, Senator Conrad's bill. And you voted no. Can you explain what the reason was?
Yeah, sure. There's two sections that we were talking about in Senator Conrad's bill. One had to do, dealt with kids in special education and just making sure that they had the capacity to take those kids as well as appropriate services. Underneath that section, it talks about all other kids, and the word appropriate was crossed out. And I feel that regardless of whether or not you are a special education student, programs in schools and services in schools should be appropriate to that child's needs. For instance, if a child was a foster child and needed counseling or special services.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. So did your concerns, were they handled with AM 4442, the amendment? Did that solve your issue?
I am in discussion with Senator Conrad about that,
So you're looking to put an amendment on?
possibly.
Okay. Then the other one that I had questions about was LB 632. It came out of Committee 7-1. LB 632 looked like it was amended with AM 5 or 1208, and its provisions for students in pre-kindergarten. What was your issue with that one?
Initially, that bill was just pertaining to Omaha and Lincoln areas.
Okay.
And it was extended out to all school districts. So I was just unsure on how schools in rural areas were going to be able to meet those needs.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for answering questions. I see there's an indefinitely postponed motion by Senator Conrad. It's kind of peculiar to me. One of her bills is in this bill. I would assume that she really doesn't want that to happen, but who knows? So I'd like to ask Senator Merman a question if I could.
Senator Merman, will you yield to a question?
Yes.
Senator Merman, I spoke to you off of the mic about 648 not having a committee statement. Did you discover why that's that way?
I can get back to you on that.
Say that again.
I can get back to you on that. I'd have to check.
Because I noticed all the other bills you put on there had a committee statement, but that one did not. So I was trying to figure out. Because when we have this, thank you, that's all I have. Because when we have this many bills in a package like this, it's always interesting to see why those people who were in committee that had the most information about it voted as they did. And trying to get an understanding of this from Senator Walz, I understand what her concerns were. But this is a very, very difficult thing.
1 minute.
Very difficult for us who are not in the Education Committee, not on the committee, to make decisions about 17 bills. That's very, very cumbersome. And so trying to delve into all that and try to understand how you should vote based on correct information is difficult. So we'll keep listening to see if I can gather other information that makes it more clear to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator Jacobson, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm hoping Senator Linehan is nearby. I'm going to yield her some time here. I just did want to make a few brief comments with regard to this bill. Obviously, like so many of these bills this year, this has got a lot of things in it. The comments I wanted to make this morning really speak to those people who have emailed me through the year here now on issues with regard to public school funding and what are we doing for public school funding. And I want to make it clear that this is another component of the things that we're doing to make a real commitment to public education and education in general. I was an ag teacher for 4 years when I first got out of college. I would tell you I couldn't imagine being a teacher today and the difficulty it is to be a teacher today. I think everything I've done since that time has been easier, although I really enjoyed my time teaching. it was enough years ago, I couldn't imagine trying to do that today. And I have the utmost respect for teachers that are out there in our school systems today, moving youth forward. Education is a cornerstone of how we're going to get this next generation into the workforce and being productive citizens. And anything we can do to continue to make that happen is a good investment. There are so many pieces of this bill. I do want to speak specifically to Senator Wayne's piece of the bill, which is LB 783, the STEAM Development Act. The STEAM Development Act really focuses on STEM, and I was able to see a demonstration of a program that's out there that looks almost like a Game Boy. It's almost like a game. In fact, really it is, but it's a teaching tool for STEM. It's amazing if you watch that and you look at how difficult, particularly chemistry is for students to learn, and yet this breaks it down and makes it fun and easy. I know in my years as a teacher, it was so critically important to be able to relate to those students, have them pick up the concepts of what you're trying to teach, and that's how they learn. And I can tell you this is a critical part of this bill. I'm very pleased to see that it's in there. There's $5 million allocated annually in this bill that would pay for that for all public schools for all school districts throughout the state of Nebraska. So I think it's a great tool. It's not an unfunded mandate. It's a funded opportunity for each of the schools to use should they choose to use it. But this is just another example of our commitment to education. And with that, I'm going to yield the remainder of my time to Senator Linehan.
Senator Linehan, you have 2 minutes, 10 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Jacobson. Picking up where I left off, when I originally introduced the retention bill, it was a little different. So if you're looking at the bill or the green copy, you're going to notice there are changes. So again, it's $2,500 per teacher for their after they finish their second year, their fourth year, and their sixth year. And when I sped through a little bit last time when I was on the mic, I'll go slower now. It also includes, and I think this is really critically important, a $5,000 grant for any teacher who goes back and gets a STEM, SPED, special education, or dual credit certificate. We have, and I've talked to, we have a problem, a real shortage with special ed teachers, and it is unfortunate, and we're handling that we're at least improving that on the finance side by saying no matter where that student's in school across the state will pick up with the federal, so it's federal and state money.
1 minute.
Will go up to 80% for the cost of that student. So that will help, but it won't help if we can't find the teachers. So this teacher retention is, all of us that have been working on the committee for the last few years have been trying to find ways where we could do this. So again, I want to thank the whole committee. And then we had no one that came in against this package, and several people, if you look at the committee statements on the committee statement, several people who supported doing this, and we worked with the Department of Ed, the teachers' colleges, the public schools. This is something that I think a vast majority of people supported. There were a couple that came in neutral, and that was about which year it was paid out, and we addressed that need. So, and I'll be on the floor the whole time when this is on if anyone has questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Senator Hughes, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am a little bit out of order, how Senator Von Gillern was too. I am going to speak to an amendment, Amendment 1528, which will be brought by the committee to this bill, LB 705. AM 1528 contains LB 585, which I introduced to provide our schools with greater flexibility in providing a more comprehensive behavioral and mental health training that focuses on suicide awareness and prevention. LB 585 is a tweak to our current law, which was championed by former Senator Amanda McGill Johnson. Suicide awareness and prevention training is an important part of overall behavioral and mental health programs in our public schools. And under the current law, Nebraska educators, school administrators, and staff are required to take 1 hour of training focused on suicide and awareness and prevention. This is a great thing. However, under the current interpretation of the law, it has had the unintended consequence of forcing educators to sit through essentially the exact same training year after year. What LB 585 does, which is now Amendment 1528, is that it clarifies the intent of Senator Johnson's original legislation and ensures that all school staff who interact with students receive this training. LB 585 positions our schools to better provide a greater scope of training in covering a broader spectrum of behavioral and mental health that can contribute to suicide in our youth. And it really comes down to local control. So if one of our school districts is seeing particular issues with something that could lead to suicide, they can focus that awareness training on that year on that particular issue. And I am all about local control. LB 585 was also a speaker priority bill, and I want to thank Speaker Arch for making it one of his priority bills this session. LB 585 had 9 people, including myself and former Senator McGill Johnson, testify in support of this bill, and no one opposed it. It was reported to the general file by the Education Committee by a vote of 8-0, and this bill has no fiscal impact. I wish to thank Chairman Merman for providing the opportunity to advance LB 585 as Amendment 1528. I'm also going to switch hats a little bit on what I'm talking about, and I want to thank the Education Committee for this package of bills, although I would prefer that we talk about each one separately and vote on its own merit, but it is a package today, and that's the word of the session, I think, is package. So thank you in particular for Senator Linehan and the Education Committee for the Teacher Recruitment and Retention Act that will incentivize teachers and recruitment intention of new teachers. This is a huge issue, and from what the research shows, that doing some of these things will actually, we will see an increase in available people for these positions, and so thank you for that. I will get back on and talk through some of the other things, but if Senator Linehan would like the rest of my time, that would be fine with me. Oh, and she's gone. I'll turn it back. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Linehan, you have a minute.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. So there is another part, I have another bill in here that is a alternative teaching certificate, and I will punch in and talk about that later. It's just one more thing. It's not like anybody can walk up the street and become a teacher, and Senator Walz had an amendment that improved it, I think. So next time I'm up, I will talk about that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Vargas, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Good morning. First, I want to thank the Education Committee and Chairman Merman for including my bill, LB 724, into Amendment 1468. I know we're getting a little bit ahead of this, but as many of us that have been introducing bills, Senator Linehan just has been describing, and Senator Hughes and others that have either an amendment or a bill as part of the larger committee amendment. My bill, LB 724, is part of this. It's very simple. LB 724 would remove the basic skills test requirement for teachers and administrators, which is fulfilled through the Praxis Core exam. Just a little bit of details. Teachers go through a lengthy process of coursework, specialized certification, student teaching, and preparation before entering their own classroom. Now, having gone through this process myself as a former teacher, I can tell you that it is not always easy. A little background, the core exam, you got to receive a passing score. An applicant must achieve 4 different metrics across 3 different portions of the test. 156 or above in reading, 150 or above in math, 160 or above in writing, and a composite score of 468 or above, with no single portion being more than 1 point below the specified minimum scores. Now, the Praxis Core exam can also be rather expensive for soon-to-be educators, costing $150 for the combined reading, writing, and mathematics tests, and doesn't account for the years of work and preparation these students have already put into their field. This Praxis Core
They also must take the Praxis Subject Assessments exam, a teaching endorsement in their intended subject area. LB 724, as amended, would not eliminate the Praxis Subject Assessments exam and only pertains to the Praxis Core exam. Now, standardized testing is a barrier for many students, whether they have trouble with the time portion, English in their second language, or missing by just a few points. The Praxis Core exam is an expensive hurdle for prospective teachers, for students in our education system, and our standardized tests do not always and should not determine what type of teacher they will be for our students. Many of you sitting here today have worked in classrooms or in some other settings. And as you all reflect on the coursework, training, and preparation for these positions, I'd like to ask yourselves if another step in the process, a time standardized test, would have made a difference in your abilities to serve the students of our state. Nebraska, among other states, is currently facing a teacher shortage, as Senator Linehan has described. Eliminating the Praxis Core exam, we are allowing a high number of qualified teachers to begin teaching in the classroom sooner. This will be eliminating some fees, reducing some burdensome barriers and regulations for people to get in the classroom, still maintaining a high standard, and addressing our teacher shortage. Thank you again to the Education Committee for supporting this and putting as part of their package amendment. Thank you again to the Education Committee, and thank you again to Chairperson Merman. With that, I'd like once again thank the Education Committee for finding a place for this bill within LB 705. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Vargas. Senator McKinney, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I rise in support of LB 705 because first I want to say thank you to the Education Committee and Chairperson Merman for including my bill, LB 632, which prevents pre-K students and second grade students from being suspended. And my intent behind bringing the bill is because I believe it's important for this body to prioritize eliminating the school to prison pipeline as much as possible. I don't think it's productive, and I don't even think it works to suspend pre-K students or second grade students at all. And that's why, because I was a kid that was suspended at that age, and quite frankly, I don't believe it helped. Yeah, I went home and watched cartoons. I don't think that changed my behavior at all. And I don't think and for me, I believe it prepares kids, in my opinion, especially kids that look like me, for the juvenile justice system, the child welfare system, and then the criminal justice system in our state pens. It's a lot of kids and it's a lot of individuals that are in our state penitentiaries today that were being suspended at that age. And I think that had a negative effect on their futures. And I think it's important for us to prioritize going upstream and preventing kids from being suspended because it's important. If you have any questions, I'm free to any questions, but honestly and quite frankly, I think it's just important to prevent kids at that age from being suspended. I find no logical reason behind it, honestly. I understand kids act out, but I think our schools should be able to find alternatives to suspension to ensure that those kids aren't disproportionately affected and we don't have ripple effects of our kids beginning to go into the juvenile justice system, the child welfare system, and then our pens. And then we wouldn't be proposing a prison if we would have done this 30 years ago, I believe. So that's why I brought the bill, and I really appreciate the committee for putting it in the package, because I think it's truly important to swim upstream and find ways to address our criminal justice system, our juvenile justice system, and our child welfare system, because each system is failing, and there are disproportionately failing kids that come from my community, and that's why it's important to me. Thank you.
Thank you.